Welcome to Beyond Fringe. I know it's been a while since anyone's heard from us, but we are back live from quarantine. How you doing, Tiny?
Well, I'm good. Just practicing this social distancing. Staying
I
home.
am
Still.
social. Yes. I have been socially distanced. I don't know how long has it been now? Over a month?
Oh yeah. It's been a while now. Of course, I don't know about you, but I kind of social distanced before it was cool.
Yes, that's because most people don't like being that close to you, Tiny. I
Yeah.
kid. I kid. I'm kidding.
Well,
So,
it's just because they're afraid. They look at me and they get worried when I get hungry. So.
I understand. I've been there. I've seen that. That's why I usually keep a burger in my pocket for you. In case you get hungry. Here you go, Tiny. Go get the burger.
I'm gonna
Um,
start calling you Cheeseburger Eddie.
yes, definitely. So, anything interesting going on in this little quarantine years? And I know you're still working, and that can't be interesting. I mean, that's got to be strange.
Yeah. Well, you know what? What's been kind of interesting, and we've talked about it a little bit before, but with everything, the past, I don't know how many years, but past several years, everything paranormal's kind of ramped up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And, we talked a little bit about some odd stuff happening around my workplace since everybody's not been there. And then we got to talking a little bit, I'm kind of right in the middle of a hot spot. So I look up at night and I expect just any time for old Squatchy to walk across the parking lot or, tree peak on me.
Yeah, you sent me some of those pictures you took and that video you took with that new equipment, and I tell you, that place is creepy.
Yeah.
It would not surprise me a bit if you've had a cryptid admirer for a while, because I don't think you'd be able to see him just or her until it just decided it was time for you to see it. So you never know with a place like that,
Yeah.
because I think it's also got some paranormal activity around there too. I mean, just from the way the things you've said to me and the area and its history. So you never know with a place like that.
Yeah. And I've been seeing shadows, things like that. It just seems, and especially during storms, which is has kind of fascinated me. We've had some pretty strong storms here lately, and it seems like the shadows have increased during that time. So, and you can only guess that it's the lightning charging the air and so forth and so on, just giving them a little bit more oomph.
Well, I mean, I think that probably just kind of, you're right, is more of an oomph, but it also gives them the ability to, if it is paranormal, it gives them the extra energy they need to do what they want to do. And, if they're going to be seen, that's when you're going to see them.
Yeah.
So it's just, it depends. It's all situational. Like I said, though, just from the abilities you have and the things you usually see, I'm surprised you haven't had like full blown contact right now. So I think that's coming.
Well, at least I have some new equipment to try out when it does.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome if you get some of that on your new camera. That'll be pretty sweet. Looking forward to that. So, Tiny, what I thought we'd talk about a little bit today is kind of like a little bit of the history of the Cynocephali. And I've been doing some more research, and I tell you what, man, there's a lot out there, and I don't think people realize how much of an actor the Cynocephali has played in history. And I'm just looking at some of the notes I took, and just from looking at a few things here in the historic record, the Cynocephali, and I know we've talked about this before, but it goes all the way back to the Sumerians and the Egyptians. I mean, the Sumerians have depictions of them in the chronographs, and the Egyptians, of course, you had Anubis. I mean, he was a deity for them. But there's a book I found, and I've been reading, and it's very interesting, and it's called The Book of Marvels and Travels, and it's by a guy named Sir John Mandeville. Now, this guy traveled all over from England. Basically, he was going to the Holy Land, and then he was in Egypt, Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, all over India, just everywhere. And basically what he talks about seeing is like principalities and kingdoms where they are inhabited and ruled by basically dogmen. and how they communicate and what they do and how talented artists they are, things like that. And it just kind of is astonishing to me that people today say, oh, that can't be real, when we have it on historic record that these creatures have been around. Now, like I said, you can take this book as you will. A lot of people say it's just kind of like an exaggeration, but the truth of the matter is Marco Polo talked about the Cynocephali. As we all know, I've said this before, Alexander the Great had Cynocephali in his mercenary army to help fight for him. So, I mean, these things have all been in the historic record. And in this book, Mandeville talks about how there's these small islands off the coast of India, and they're basically inhabited by the Cynocephali, and they have a royal, they have a system, a hierarchy, and they have a king, and there's certain things you have to do. And if you want safe passage through the islands, through their ports, and to be able to trade, you have to give them a certain tribute, and there's rules that they follow. So it's actually fascinating. When I'm done with it, of course, I'll let you read it. But that started me thinking about like kind of the Cynocephali historic aspect in this country. And I think if you look back, I think probably the first real the first real accounts of the Cynocephali, aka the Dogman, that we have in this country that everyone's aware of. I'm sure there's stuff earlier, because I'm sure there's stuff that Native Americans have that we haven't heard. I mean, wouldn't you say that's probably accurate?
Oh yeah, most certainly. And just in case that we have some new listeners that didn't catch our Dogman podcast, we touched on the Cynocephali a little bit then, but all it is an ancient term for dogman, correct?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, that's their pretty much species, I guess, what you
Right.
call it. And the other thing is, I know some of the listeners might wonder why we're always talking about the Dogman and things of that nature. Well, the truth of the matter is we're not experts, and anyone that says there's an expert, of course, in the paranormal or the cryptid world, you know how I feel about that. They're not being honest with you. There's no such thing as an expert in this field. There's people that have been involved with these creatures for years, and they have gained knowledge, like some of the other friends we have, and us included. But no one's an expert. And if they say they are, again, that's when I tend to walk away. But the reason why we are always talking so much about this is, one is they are a cryptid, and two, I mean, they're kind of like the new cryptid. They're like the new Bigfoot kind of thing. And I think people are seeing a lot more of them. And that's why we're getting all these reports, and that's why they're becoming so popular now. The other
So
thing is, I think we've been talking about Dogman for years. I mean, that's just, our past podcast, but on our own research, we've always had Dogman accounts. I mean, I've seen one myself. So, I mean, I know for a fact they're real. But I think we've done more research than most people in this topic. And like I said, I'm not saying we're experts, but I'd say pretty much, I'd say we're some of the definitely go-to people for Dogman information. Would you agree with that?
yeah, I think so. But let me ask you a question. You're talking about the historic aspect of Dogman, and much like Sasquatch, Dogman has had many accounts over many years in many different places. Obviously, you're talking about Alexander the Great having an army of them and an island of them, things like that. So, why do you think they're just now starting to get popular? I mean, here, we'll say here in the States, because I don't know how popular they are in other countries, but here in the States, they're, like you said, they're that relatively new cryptid. Why just now? And why
I'll
are
be
we?
honest with you, Tanya. I don't know. I think people keep mistaken identity for these sightings. I think they always, they could say, oh, it was a bear running on two legs, or it could have been a Bigfoot. I think a lot of the sightings, there's some, I think, I can't, it was one of the old timers that had a interview, and, he'd been doing Bigfoot research for 40, 50 years. I can't remember which one it was, so I just don't want to give a name and quote the wrong person. But they said they're pretty sure, they have reports going back to when they started that they think were dogmen that had been misidentified as Bigfoot. and that's another thing they came up with that, where the Beast of Seven Shoots type Bigfoot, the type 3 or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Which, again, I'm not a big fan of that one. I think that's just, I think that might be a misidentification of Dogman, and they just didn't see the hawks on the legs. But again, I don't know. I'm not there all the time to see everything. I wish I was, but I'm not. So there's been this misidentification for years. And again, I wish I had access to the Native American folklore, where I could actually sit there and talk to someone and ask, what would this be called in this language, and what would be called in this language, because it would be a better way to find it. And I knew, I've heard things like in the Cherokee belief system, they just didn't mention the name because they didn't want to bring it down on you.
Right.
And you got to keep in mind, there's so many different names for cryptids, and so many different native languages. I mean, how many different words are there for Bigfoot in just our local area? So, and I know they had different names for these creatures, and I just wish I had the ability and the access to get that knowledge so I could understand it better. But I understand why. I'd be the same way if I was the Native Americans. I wouldn't want people learning about these things simply because we'd be dumb enough to go looking for them and someone get hurt. So if you look at this the right way and the different lens, they're actually protecting us from our own curiosity by not telling us. So that's just kind of the way I look at it. But it's just one of those things I wish I had the ability or the connections to just get that information just for myself. I just keep it on the low, but I think it'd be kind of cool because I know there's got to be more out there than this. There's got to be more information, and it's just kind of hard to find.
Well, and if you go on the thought process, because most people, when you talk about Dogman, it's kind of a bestial creature that's maybe not quite as smart as Bigfoot, more animalistic, things like that from what you hear reports. But if you talk about the Cynocephali, then they're an incredibly intelligent race. So information on like the Cynocephali, it's almost like a split. Like you have this group of dogmen are so much smarter than this group that we're seeing here in the United States. And to be honest, I kind of find that funny that we have the dumb ones here. But if that's the case, but the information that you would have would be completely different. You would see more of a like Anubis mythology in regards to the Cynocephali because they're an intelligent race of dogmen, right?
So I agree, and it's like I said, I'm a firm believer there's 3 types, and like I said, if you go to our website, AstralCryptidandParanormal.com, you'll see that we have them listed. I think there's 3 types. I think you have the Alpha, the Beta, and the Charlie, and that's just our little configuration on what they are. And the Alphas are the real big, strong ones. They usually don't have tail. The Betas, they're about 1.5 foot shorter than the Alphas. They may or may not have a tail, but they're still massive in stature. And then you have the Charlies, which would be, they kind of look like a wolf walking on 2 legs. So, I mean, I think there might be subcategories of these creatures, just like there's subcategories of Bigfoot. You have your type 1s, 2s, and 3s, and Patty being the type 1. And that's obviously everyone knows the Patty type is the intelligent one. It's usually the one that, sees people and runs away. Or if there's the reports of like a kid being lost in the woods and they're showing a picture of a Patty type, if they're helped by a Bigfoot, that's usually the one that helps. Does that make sense? Am I verbalizing that right? Usually the Patty type is the helpful one that doesn't really have a nefarious mindset towards human beings. Whether or not we deserve it, it's that's their decision. So, and then you have your type 2s that they're like the chimpanzee type. They're not as big, but they tend to be a little more wild. And those are the ones that usually are pretty rough and vicious. Those are the ones that are like in Texas and the South that tend to be more aggressive. So like every time I hear a bad story out of the thicket in Texas, East Texas, it's usually type 2. Now I've also been told that there is type 1s in Texas, but again, I don't know. I haven't investigated there, but I've heard very nasty things about type 2s, and the type 3s, again, that's the beast of seven shoots types, and they tend to be uh, a lot more aggressive. Now, the other thing is the type 3 might be a gugwe, or it could be a Genasqua. That's the other thing. We don't know. The Genasqua, that's the stone giant, and the gugwe is also known as a face eater. So these are not the nicest uh, types of Bigfoot. Those are the ones that will usually kill and not think twice about it. And then you have the hominid type that looks like a hominid relic. That's a caveman type. That's type 4, and they tend to be scattered all over the place. And the reports on them are varying. So why wouldn't it be feasible that we have different types of dogmen? Because we have had different stories. I mean, we're in North Carolina, Tiny. We get these reports of dogmen that are just, massive in stature. They tend not to be too aggressive towards people, but they do seem to like scaring people. So, I mean, I think what we have around here is the alpha types, definitely, just from what the reports I've had and from what I've observed myself. So, I personally think that's what we're dealing with here. So, I don't know how they would act any different than an alpha type. Does that make sense? I mean, I get reports of different things happening, but locally around here, it's always from what I would perceive to be an alpha type. And I'm sure the betas and the Charlies are out there. I just don't get a whole lot of reports on them.
Do you think that locale and environment plays a role in the type of Bigfoot or Dogman? As far as intelligence level, and how they react to people.
I do. I mean, I think if you have, like, let's just take the Falcon Monster. Apparently it's a three-toed creature. A lot of people think that's from inbreeding, but realistically, if there's an inbreeding population, they tend to have more digits. And the Falcon Monster has been, from what I've heard, again, I've never done a whole lot of research on the Falcon Monster, but they tend to be a little more, it tends to be a little more aggressive and less patient with people being in its area. Same with the Honey Island Swamp Monster. So, that could be all local. And, there's that law. Usually when it's colder, the creature's bigger. And after life, I can't think of what it's called right now. So I think, I think that's why the swamp ape, in Florida is usually reported smaller than, a type 1 patty. I think the swamp ape is a type 2. It's got that chimpanzee look to it, and tends to be more aggressive. So I think that's what that is. But I think they're regional. I think the type 2s are in the warmer climates and the type 1s are in the colder climates. But I think they also travel. I think they migrate, and I think there's a migration pattern. And again, I've said this before, if you're, a 9 to 10 foot, 1,600 pound North American primate, you really probably don't want to be spending August in the Everglades. You probably want to go where it's a little more of a temperate climate, and that's probably why there's so many reports that time of year in Canada and northern North America. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is there, and this thought just occurred to me, and I don't know why I've never thought to dig into this. Maybe you have. Is there reports of Bigfoot type creatures in areas where there are great apes, like in the rainforest, things like that?
You know what? That's a great question, Tony. But the truth is, I don't know. I know, like in Indonesia, the orang pendek is around there, and there's reports of that. But I mean, I'm sure there's great apes in that area, but I wouldn't know. And Borneo, I'm sure there's orangutans there, so there's very possible. I honestly don't know how that would work, though. I mean, there'd be probably territorial disputes, I would imagine, but I don't know. That's a great question. That's something we could probably do a little research in. Definitely, yeah. Maybe that's a topic for another show. That's a really good one.
Yeah, I'd like to dig into that, because then there's whole thought processes about, well, if they are, if Bigfoot is just a great ape, then is there crossbreeding? Is there, what is the territorial stuff like? Did Jane Goodall ever meet a Bigfoot?
No, but I have read things where she believes they're totally possible. I don't know if she 100% believes in them, but she doesn't think they're out of the realm of possibility.
Right.
Again, that's just an article. I don't know. I've never read anything that she's written, but I did see an article, and actually, that was on like a Google News feed or something. So I mean, take it for what it's worth. I don't want to misquote anyone.
Well, just the simple fact that there's so much history
Mm-hmm.
of the Sasquatch and of Dogman, and a lot of these other cryptids that we talk about. The history goes back so many years, hundreds of years. There has to be legitimacy to it.
Because you've got people all over the world pretty much with the same descriptions. That they report them having the same actions, they run the same way, they move the same way. There's that ever present pop that they hear when these creatures stand on two legs and become bipedal, and they can go from bipedal to quadruped in 2 seconds, and they're comfortable in both positions when it comes to running and maneuvering, and they both and all over the country and all over the world, they've also been seen hunting and all these other things. So I mean, you can't have this many people making up the same thing and seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just there's not enough mass hysteria. There's no mass hysteria for this, because who wants to tell people, yeah, I think I saw a werewolf, and be taken seriously in this day and age? Now, when you have open-minded people like ourselves, of course, I want to hear about it. Tell me all about it,
Yeah.
But then we also do the qualifying questions, and somewhere in there we're going to ask them if there's a history of hallucination. We like to find out if there's a drug or alcohol issue. And of course, you want to find out if this isn't the first time they've seen him. It's like, how it is. So it's getting the information, but then vetting it too. So, I mean, if you have corroborated information where, more than one witness see the exact same thing and they're all credible, then obviously, that's good enough for a court of law. Why isn't it good enough for cryptozoology? Why isn't it good enough to prove that this creature exists?
And it's, I don't know how I would react if I came face to face with either species, or really any of the other cryptids that we look for, or things like that. But when you have that experience, I could only imagine the things that change inside a person.
I think reality itself changes. I mean, I know it did for me, because you have to understand that these things are real. Like, it's not just a bedtime story. It's not just some movie you saw when you were a kid that used to scare the bejesus out of you. They're based on real things, and that's what happens. And honestly, I think it changes people. I think it changes their personality. I am a firm believer that, you can't be an armchair quarterback in cryptozoology. You have to be boots on the ground in the woods. And, I don't know how many times we've gone investigating. I can't even imagine how many times we've been investigating Tiny, but, it's always the same feeling when you're getting out of the car. Oh boy, here we go. Hope my affairs are in order, because you never really know what to expect. And that doesn't dissipate. If anything, I think that increases after you've had an experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and also, personally, I believe that when you go out and you do a paranormal investigation, so I'm out here, I'm ghost hunting, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a matter of if the place is haunted, because in my opinion, we're completely always surrounded by spirits. There's ghosts everywhere. Are they going to choose to show themselves today? And I think in the cryptid world, it's pretty much the same way. As you think of say, a big cat, I like to go back to, if there's a big cat in the woods, if you're sensitive enough, you're going to feel, you're being tracked, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the only time you're going to see that big cat is if that big cat wants you to see it.
And, I'm sure there's times on the last couple of investigations we've done, because there's an area where we were, and there'd been sightings of the Cherokee death cat in there, or, and there's other words for it. There's other terms for it, the wampus cat, things like that. But I'm sure we've probably run into something like that, and we just didn't know it because we didn't see it.
Yeah, and it's I think it's the same with Sasquatch, especially the patty type, the smart ones.
Mm-hmm.
They're I I personally believe, Christian, I know, I tend to go a little bit further out on the fringe of things than you do. But I personally believe that there is, and I say it this way because I can't think of a better term, but I think there's a kind of a mystical quality to Bigfoot. And I think that there's a knowledge that they have that say, me and you go out in the woods and, they may just know it's okay to show themselves to us. Whereas, Bill Bob and George over here go out and they just know that, they're a little bit on the crazy side and they shouldn't see them. Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense, but I don't think that's mysticism. I think that's just gut instinct. I think they can, I think if you observe us in the woods when we do investigations for Dogman, Bigfoot, little people, Puckwudgies, anything, I think that entity, that creature, even when we're doing paranormal investigations, Tiny, that entity, that creature, they know we're not there to harm them because we're not out there being aggressive. I mean, we bring offerings. If we're on sacred land, we bring offerings. We ask for permission. We'll bring tribute. Part of our gears. I mean, how many marbles have we spent, or how many marbles have we put out in the woods over the years? As just a little toy for our hairy friends. And I think they understand that. And then there's a large chance that we've been seen more than once by the same creatures. So they probably get used to us. They get used to our scent, and they know we're not there to harm them. Well, and I'm sure they're very aware that we're armed because I'm sure they can see the fact that we're armed. But I mean, I think they also realize we're not there to do them harm. I think they realize that's for our protection from other things. So I agree with that, but I don't think it's mystical at all. I think it just boils down to intelligence. I mean, they know we're there, and they also know we're there not to harm them.
Well, and especially, when we go to the haunted woods, we've been there quite a few times. And, I know for a fact, at least 2 of the times we were there, we were being paced by something in the woods that we couldn't.
Well, we saw it. We heard it. I mean, that was, let's be honest. I mean, I know that's a story we still haven't been 100% disclosed on, and we haven't given everyone 100%, not truth, but 100% of what really happened in that story. And the truth of the matter is, the reason why we don't do that is because it is so crazy.
Yeah. And
that's the reason.
And for anybody that's listening that hadn't listened to Fringe when we done it, or any of the other podcasts that we've been on that we've talked about haunted woods, the reason we call the haunted woods is because it's different. There is something about that place.
Do you mind if I just tell them about the meters?
Yeah, go ahead.
If I just talk about that. Tiny and I, we're probably 3 or 4 miles in the middle of this area.
Yeah.
And there has been cryptid sign everywhere. We're trying tree glyphs. There was more tree glyphs and they were done on purpose. There was more X formations on in these trees that I've ever seen in one location. It was to the point where they had to have been done on purpose. And the other thing is you couldn't find, like a lot of times when you see a tree break or an X or wood X, there's just 2 trees pushed down. A lot of these X's were pushed down somewhere else, dragged, and purposely made. And these are not small. These were trees. Am I wrong? I mean, you were there. I mean, these were trees.
They were trees.
I mean, and they weren't small either. So I think these were done intentionally. But the other thing is really strange is, as I've said before, I always carry a meter, usually a tri-field meter. I always carry my tri-field meter and a Geiger counter, and that's for a different reason, but that's standard equipment. Every investigation, I've got those with me. So we were hiking in, and we were just taking a moment it was a really beautiful location, and we were just taking a moment, taking some pictures, and I was just looking at all the tree sign, and it was everywhere. And we're down this hill. Would you call that a hill or a cliff? I mean, I think it was pretty much a cliff, but it was a pretty good sized cliff.
The terrain we were in is, on one side there was a cliff, and on the other side there was it went straight up. It was, You know, it's
Very
perfect.
strange. Yeah.
It was a perfect place for any sort of predator
Ambush.
because
Yeah.
you're not getting away.
No, it was just an ambush point. I mean, it's definitely a choke point. It was an ambush point. But down the cliff, it looks like there was some kind of war going on. There was trees ripped apart. You could see claw marks. You could see footprint. I mean, it was just all over the place. And honestly, it was Cynocephali, it was Dogman and Bigfoot. I mean, that's what we think happened there. We think there was a war there. I mean, a territorial dispute. I mean, it looked like something out of a DC or a Marvel comic book movie. I mean, it was just that much devastation. I mean, these things it is just ransacked. It was trashed. And we're looking there, we're taking pictures, and for some reason, I just decided to take out my meter, and I turned it on, and it turns on, and I'm just holding it, and Tiny and I were having a quick conversation, and all of a sudden, the meter pegs out. Now, for those of you who have never used a tri-field meter, that is one of probably the best pieces of paranormal cryptid equipment you can use, simply because it's so accurate and it picks up on a lot of stuff. And I believe I had it on a sum setting, didn't I, Tiny?
Yeah, I believe so. And let me stop you right there before you go on. Explain why the meters are useful for those that don't necessarily know. There's a lot of
Well,
people.
as we've always said, I think the cryptid and the paranormal, I think they're under the same umbrella. And sometimes, there's an energy spike somewhere, and it could be due to natural occurrences. It could be supernatural in nature, or, it could even be alien in nature. Again, we're paranormal cryptid, we do everything under the same umbrella. I mean, that's just what we do. So for us to see something that would make us think it would be something, different in nature, vis-a-vis a paranormal event happening, or a cryptid event, or even otherworldly. Sometimes it's just smart to take meter readings, and that way you have an understanding what kind of energies in the air, what the background energy of the place is. If I'm missing something, Tiny, please feel free to jump in.
Well, and one of the things too, when you use a meter, especially one of the natural tri-field meters, they're incredibly sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And everything living puts off an EMF field. And obviously, the bigger the thing, the more of a field that it's going to put off. So the thought is, when you're in the woods and you're in the middle of nowhere, you're not going to get an EMF spike because there's nothing to give it unless it comes from a person or something else. So you're thinking maybe if you get a field, then it's something large moving around. It's a thought. It's not exact science. And all of these tools that we use are flawed because we use them for something that they're not made for.
And definitely. And the other thing I want to say is, years ago we had a theory, something I ran by Tiny. I had this idea. We were doing research on bears. And the reason why we're doing research on bears is because of the predatory habits and the things they do. And we were correlating that to cryptid behavior. And I had this idea. I'm like, if we can find bears with a meter, and if we adjust it properly for energy settings, then we could probably be better off finding cryptids in the woods. And that was one of the reasons that we started using the meters for that specific purpose. And I still believe that's true. Problem is it's kind of hard to get an accurate reading of a Bigfoot. So it's hard to set the equipment. But we do, like I said, we try lots of different things in the scientific method to our approach. So this was one of them. And as I turn the meter on, it kicks for a second, then it's going to get the background, and then it settles. And it makes a noise. It makes a hum. Well, I thought I had broken it or something, because it starts to peg out. Was it 8 or 9? I don't know. There was something ridiculous. It won't stop.
Yeah, it was up around 9.
It did not stop. And like any direction I pointed it, it would not stop. So I'm looking at Tiny and I'm like, are you seeing this? Because I have never had that meter do that, ever. And we've had that in some crazy, like even in haunted places. I think the highest we've ever ticked up on a paranormal investigation was a 4. So this thing is pegging out. And Tiny and I, we're taking pictures of it. We're recording it. I gave that to Tiny, and still whistling. I grab the Geiger counter. I turn that on, and the Geiger counter starts going nuts. And I'm looking at Tiny, I'm like, what the heck did we just walk into here? So we have two completely separate meters. We got a field meter, a natural EM1 field meter going off, and then we've got a Geiger counter going off. And at the exact same time, they both stop. And there's nothing. And when they stop, I was taking pictures with my phone. I look at my phone, and I had absolutely no signal. And my phone just powers down. And along with that powering down, my GoPro that I had strapped on turns off. And there's some other things that happen, and maybe one day we'll talk about that. But I can assure you that was a very, very strange place. Am I forgetting anything that we want to disclose about that area, Tiny? Because I've got goosebumps thinking about it right now.
There's so much about that place, and there's a lot that we're not saying about it for our own reasons. But I think that in that area, there were several different things going on, and you were talking about it looking like a war zone, and it did. I mean, it was tore up, and we went back the next week, and all of that was cleaned up. It was like it never happened.
Yeah, and they had, or someone had cleaned up all the X formations. You could tell someone or some people had been there with chainsaws for the amount of sawdust. So again, it is what it is.
But I also think that there is, I think that that's sacred land up there as well. I think there's several things going on, but the one thing that struck me is I believe that was sacred land at one point. And
I believe it. Yeah, I believe you're right, but I believe it's still sacred land. And I think the reason why we didn't have any real issues is because we did the right thing. We paid homage.
Yeah, exactly.
And we were very polite. And I think that's one of the reasons, because I'm sure you remember very well, towards the end of that little excursion of ours, there was the other episodes that occurred. And I don't think that would have ended as well as it did had we not done what we had done prior. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that the more that I think about it, and the more that we run into odd things, I think that Bigfoot in particular, I think that they're attracted to sacred ground for one reason or another. I like to think that it's because they watch over it.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
But I think that's part of the reason, just part of the reason why that place is so odd, and why we had different experiences up there. And I've been up there, not just with you, but I've been up there with four different people. And each time I've went up there, it's been a different experience. It's a different feel, depending on who I take up there with me. And that just speaks volumes about the paranormal aspect of it.
It's one of those places where, there's a lot of research done in different areas. Something happens every once in a while. Maybe you get an image of something. Maybe you get a picture. Maybe you get this. Maybe you get that. But this is one of those places where I would never bring a rookie there. I would also never bring anyone that is unarmed there.
And talking about going to a place where something may happen, something may not. One of the things too about what we do, and I say paranormal as an umbrella term, whether it's cryptid, ghost, or UFO, or pretty much anything in the realm that's abnormal is paranormal as an umbrella term. But most of the evidence that you get when you research paranormal is your gut feelings and your personal experiences. And the fallacy that we have to deal with is we can't record those. And that's why you have a lot of people going, well, I know what I saw, I know what I felt. And as investigators, well, okay, I understand that and I believe you, but the scientists that, we have to try to be,
right,
look for, recordable data. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of that there. That's why I say there is no such thing as an expert. because we don't have the equipment to record the information that we need to make it a scientific discovery.
You know, it's funny is I've got somewhere we did some research somewhere, but I remember asking you, as I've said this before, there's a lot of guys, if you've never heard our podcast before, Tiny is paranormally gifted. He can sense the things going on. I'm just an investigator. I don't have any, what's the word I'm looking for, extra sixth sense or anything like that. I'm just a normal average guy. I just like looking for things in the woods and paranormal aspect and aliens and conspiracies and things like that. But it's my belief, because I've seen it in action, but Tiny is gifted. He's got a gift from God, and he can feel and sense things, and nefarious things, shall I say, things of an evil nature, don't like Tiny, and they'll usually leave if he's around. I've seen it. I used to think that'd be ridiculous. I was never a big paranormal guy in the beginning. I always thought there was science and logic, and then I've had some experiences, and that's even why I put paranormal in the name of Astral Cryptid Paranormal, is because I think it's a lot more connected, and eventually I think Tiny and I are going to find out why. I just don't know how long it's going to take, but we'll keep going. But anyway, but paranormally, Tiny is very gifted, and there's been times where we've researched and we'll be taping something or video something, and you'll hear me say, "Tiny, what are you feeling?" And it's not, "Are you nervous?" It's not, "Are you scared?" It's, "What are you sensing? What are you picking up?" And that's that little umbrella cover I use for all those emotions and feelings, is because I know Tiny can articulate what he's feeling. And if it's good, that's great. We keep videotaping. If it's meh, we're on guard. And if this isn't good, we're out of Dodge. And that's because we're listening to the instincts. And when you say it's hard for scientists to read that, it's almost impossible. You can't. There's no scale on how do you feel as far as being scientific research. Because you can have a bad day, you can have a good day. It's one of those things. So that's where I think the research becomes on that paranormal outskirts, is because you're having to use your gut feelings as your guide. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what makes the field difficult. That,
Mm-hmm.
along with, like you touched on it, we share the belief, that it's all connected somehow. And the researchers out here that are doing, great work in their field don't believe that. So it's all so compartmentalized. There's great information out there, and there's great researchers that are incredibly knowledgeable, had huge experiences, but say one of those people are a ufologist, and they look at you as a Bigfoot guy and go, "You're crazy." So
there has been so many times where we have been in different events or different places, and people always make the comments that, in fact, I think we did, wasn't it Creep Geeks, when we were being interviewed? What did they call us? Like an anomaly?
Yeah.
Because you've got you've got the paranormal and the cryptid world working together. And again, here's more reason I believe that everything's connected. I just think everything is connected regardless. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of the Native American mythos, folklore, and mindset, is because the Native Americans have realized that everything is connected since their inception. And I think that's the way to be as humans. Everything is connected. And the way they treat the land and the way they treat themselves and each other, there's respect and there's love, but they also have been in this area for 14,000 years, and they know how to deal with these situations. And only the arrogance of the Europeans changes that mindset, because if you talk to Native Americans, they still, you can have a Native American physicist, and he'll probably still say that everything is still connected, everything affects everything. And that might not be the scientific approach, but that's just their gut feeling or their instinct. And they're 100% right, in my opinion. Everything is connected. And, that's why we're looking for answers. We want to see how it's connected. All right, and that's why I always revert back to Native American folklore or theories or mythos, and I have nothing but respect for that. And that's the way I think things should be looked at and thought of. And it's because in the way we do things, it's like, okay, this happened, but why did this happen? How is it connected to this happening down here? And that's one of the things about the haunted force, where the amount of things happening in there that are so different all have to be connected. And that's just a small microcosm a macrocosm, excuse me, of what I think the world really is, because I believe everything's connected. And I think that's why we're so, you know, opportunistic in what we look at, because we're going to look at everything and somehow it's all connected.
All right. So I agree. First of all, I agree. So let me switch it around just a little bit here, and let's go in a different direction. So we talk about everything being connected. We talk about, researching everything, and honestly, I have experienced UFOs. I have seen them. I know that they're there, but they're exactly what the word stands for: unidentified flying object. Just because you see something in the sky that you don't know what it is, don't mean that it's not one of us in it. It could be little green men. Now, I believe in aliens. I don't believe we're the only ones in the universe. But I'm not big on researching them because they're just harder to research. I mean, you see stuff in the sky, but what else is there? You don't see any physical evidence unless you believe in, like the crop circles and stuff and abductees, things like that. So it's not that ufology has not really captured my interest as much as cryptozoology and the paranormal. Now, that being said, there's a place that we went to. We were Bigfoot hunting and wound up running into what you believe is a Dogman.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same place, we had found an area that for all intents and purposes looked like a freaking UFO had landed. And on top of that, your Geiger counter was going off, which meant there was some sort of radiation there. And here again, we're back in the middle of nowhere in the woods. So I'm going a little far out here, Christian. Can you handle it?
I'm with you.
Okay. So we have experienced a trifecta here not far from us here in North Carolina of Bigfoot sign, because in that same place we found what can only be described as a killing field. There were several hunting blinds facing the middle of an open area in the woods, like something, like a squats would chase a deer in, and all of a sudden others would converge and have a meal. Same spot looked like a UFO landed. Same spot, possible Dogman encounter. Okay, so going back, talking about the history of Dogman and the Cynocephali and how intelligent they were back in the days of Alexander the Great and further back. Do you think that maybe there's a connection between UFO visitors and our far past and some of these cryptids?
Yeah, I do. There's reports, and again, this is all under. This is why we call ourselves investigators, because you can't walk away from evidence. You have to acknowledge it. But let's be honest. There's been reports in the 60s of Bigfoot or Bigfoot-like creatures seen getting in and out of UFOs or ships. There have been reports in South America. I heard this story and I thought it was incredible, but it was kind of cool at the same time, where they're talking about how dogmen are kind of like the predator. They come down here to hunt, and usually when they land, they've got armor, they've got sword. They're all armored up, and then when they come out and hunt, they take all that off and they get primal. Now that again, and apparently there's a facility somewhere in South America that had captured a unit of them, and they broke out, killed everyone, and just disappeared in the woods. And again, there's a whole. But then again, it's hard to extrapolate the fact from fiction and stuff like that. But is it possible it's true? Of course, it's possible. We have depictions of aliens, of alien UFOs in biblical text. Look at the Bhagavad Gita. That talks about basically a space war. So is it possible? Of course, it's possible. It might even be likely. That could explain a whole lot. There's always that X factor we're missing. We still have yet to find the missing link between man and primate. So, why couldn't it be an alien involvement? Is it possible? Of course it's possible. And people say, well, what about, religion and God didn't do this? Well, how do you know God didn't do that to do that on purpose? I think, everyone looks at things in a small scale. When
Yeah.
you're talking about God, God's everything. So there's a design, God already knows how it's going to go down. He sets it in motion. So I'm a firm believer that you can have alien intervention and still have God because God had that happen. Does that make sense? So that's why I think, the way we look at things is a whole lot different than most people.
You have to be inclusive because I mean, there's so much in this world that we take for granted that we don't see because we're busy surviving. Just like me, I saw for years what I called a little dog faced fairy, and I saw it twice. Had I seen it once, I might have dismissed it, but I saw it twice in the same place, and I almost wrecked both times. And was it a dog faced fairy? Was it a freaking gnome? Was it a puckwudgie? I don't know because I didn't see it that well, but I know it was a short, fat, ugly little thing that almost caused me to wreck. And I've had Sasquatch experience. Not like I want to. One of these days, I want to see one face to face. And I may or may not regret that. I don't know
Yeah,
yet.
I know. I've got the plan for that
Um,
on what to do afterwards.
I'm not real sure if I would want to see a dog man face to face at a distance. Now I was listening to a podcast. I'm not going to name it because I don't have permission to name it, but it's a very popular podcast. It's about Dogman.
Is it our friend?
It's one of our friends,
Okay.
and they were talking about they do a lot of coyote hunting, and one of the individuals was talking about seeing a dogman chasing a deer through his scope. That I could handle. I'd be okay. Now this is cool. Now if I had a more up close and personal experience, I don't know. Dogman's one that I'm not sure I would want to meet.
See, I find that hard to believe because I know it sounds weird, but I mean, you have dogs and you spoil your dogs. I mean, those are your babies. And I think that would come off. I think the dog man could sense that about you.
Well,
Yeah, he takes care of some of my buddies, I don't know. He'd probably smell them on you.
yeah. Well, I'm sure. Uh, the thing is, I think the reason I feel that way is because there's not as much. Um, what's the word I'm looking for, Christian? I don't say mythology, but that's not right. Like
Information.
with Bigfoot, we have so much knowledge about Bigfoot out there, whether you believe it or not.
Right.
There's so many stories carried down about Bigfoot, but there's not that with Dogman, and you hear more frightening stories about Dogman, even though the stories don't end up violent. They're more on the scary side than Bigfoot, right?
And that's a great transition, Tiny. And that's you're very right. And here's why I say that, because when you look at what the first reports of the dogman were in this country prior to Native Americans, like the first European reported, you pretty much have to go to Michigan for that.
Yeah.
And I believe it's if I pronounce this wrong, please forgive me, but the Michigan dogman first kind of got famous by in a place called Wexford County, Michigan, by the Manistee River. And that was in June of 1887. And it was reported to be a 7 to 8 foot tall, basically huge wolf with bluish yellow amber eyes. And that was where the birth and the legend of the Dogman showed up. Now, in this particular arena in Michigan, the Dogman shows up every 7 to 10 years. Sometimes the folklore is every 10 years, but it doesn't appear to be completely menacing. And there's a song called, is it the Dogman song?
I can't remember the name of it, but yeah,
Well,
there's a
anyway, it's kind of
song about
cool.
it.
But in that song, he basically talks about the mythology of the Michigan Dogman. And that's kind of funny because it completely correlates. Like this guy, whoever wrote this, I think he was a DJ or something. And it's actually a really cool song. We just don't have the rights to talk about it or play it, so I'm not going to do it or link it. But it's like almost an epic poem type song because it gives you the history. And if you listen to that song, you pretty much know the history of the Dogman because that's how it happened. Now, the difference is the Dogman isn't just seen every 7 to 10 years now; it's seen all the time in all different conditions, and it's not just Michigan; it's all over the place. I mean, we have reports from South America, and yeah, that brings me to another topic. We're a Asheville Cryptid and Paranormal Society, and a lot of people think we're just regional. And the truth is, Tiny and I do a lot of our work in other states and in other places. So we've been thinking about rebranding simply because I want to be able to help more people, and I don't want them to think that they're just geographically stuck someplace. So in other words, if someone's living in upstate New York and they want to get in touch with us for help, I want them to think that they can. So what we're probably going to be doing in the next couple of months or something is going to be rebranding our name, and we're probably going to go to American Cryptid and Paranormal Society. And the reason why I say that now is because I want people to understand that specifically those people that listen and follow to us, that if we disappear, we haven't disappeared. We've just rebranded and changed our name, and that's what we'll be doing in the next couple of months, and we'll be talking about that more. But the reason why we're doing this is because Asheville Cryptid and Paranormal Society, we're still going to keep that name. We're going to have it. It's going to be on the website. It's still going to be on everything, but it's going to be under the bigger scope of American Cryptid and Paranormal Society. Does that make sense, Tiny?
Yep.
So we want people from, like, if someone in Oregon wants us to help them, and we have the ways and means to get out there, we'll do it. And again, we're not charging anyone for this. This is all research-based stuff, and we're just trying to help people. And I think we'll have a better grasp of being to help people if people look at a name and it says American. That's the whole scope of the country. That's basically what we're looking for. We're global if we have to be. That's not the issue. But I think what we've been doing is just by sticking with the name Asheville Cryptid and Paranormal, we've isolated ourselves in one geographical region. And that's not the case. We'll go and do research pretty much anywhere we're needed. So that's just something to think about because we'll be doing that later on down in a couple of months. But what I wanted to kind of end up with was, we talked a little bit about the Michigan Dogman and how that came around. But I think around about that time, I think they were having a whole lot more sightings than that, Tiny, and I think they were probably mistaken for probably Bigfoot. What do you think?
Well, I think it's possible, but my thought process on that is the description of Dogman typically tends to be, like a giant werewolf, almost cartoonish, like in what was that movie, Van Helsing, that werewolf. That's kind of hard to mistake for a Bigfoot. I mean, there's a difference there, a pretty prominent
That's
difference.
true. That is true. That's a good point. And like I said, the only reason why I say that is because I think there's probably been a whole lot more sightings that were not reported or they didn't know how to classify them.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, and
I don't think, every 7 to 10 years, that's not a whole lot.
yeah, and there's going to be people that see stuff going, I'm not telling anybody that because you're going to think I'm crazy.
Exactly.
So there's probably, I'd say we probably hear a third of the reports that actually happen of the high strangeness in the world.
Well, high strangeness is our business. That's what we do. But you're absolutely right. I don't even think it's a third. I think maybe it's 5%. I mean, it's probably less than that because people, even to this day, there's a stigma of, oh, hey, this guy's a ghost hunter. You don't know he's crazy, or he's just scam artist, or blah blah blah. Or things like that, or he's just trying to get rich off of Bigfoot. It's almost impossible to get rich when you're not charging anything. So I mean, that's how I handle that question. But I mean, it's one of those things where people just are scared to be honest because they're scared of being stereotyped. And I understand. Believe me, I understand. I get it, and I know you understand that too. But until people are willing to just bite the bullet and say, hey, listen, this is what I saw, and I don't care what anyone says, that's going to be an issue.
That's why I try to be so honest about my experiences. I know some of my experiences sound flat out crazy, And they felt flat out crazy when they were happening, but you know what? They happened.
Hey,
So
man, I agree. I was there. I know some of them happened. I was there. I mean, if you told people, if we didn't have the video evidence of, like, the what we call the triangle, no one would believe that.
yeah,
I mean, no one would believe that. That canopy was, what was that, a 30 to 45-foot circle that was just right down, boom. Everything was singed. Everything was dead. I mean, it was all black. You could tell something had come through there. And then
it,
on top of that, the ground's radioactive. Ah, great. So, you
it
know,
was it was pretty amazing, just that
yeah.
trifecta that we ran into, and we wasn't even expecting to run into anything that day.
No, because that's the place that was just basically a little practice run.
Yeah.
And boy, did that get weird.
Well, it just goes to show, you never know, and when you go somewhere, you just never know.
Exactly. That's the thing. Never know. Always be prepared and keep believing. I am the Cryptid Guy, and with me, as always, has been Daniel Tiny Hurst. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next time. Have a great night. Be safe. Wash your hands, and keep believing. Can't say that enough. Tiny, you got anything you want to say?
6 feet apart, y'all. 6 feet.
6 feet. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.